I shall propose it explicitly. The new constitution will go to a consultative referendum, so it is the people who will say whether they are in agreement or not with the new strengthened constitution.
Venezuela, once one of Latin America's most prosperous countries, is facing a deep social and economic crisis. Falling oil prices, financial mismanagement, and corruption have all taken their toll on a country that's operating under a new reality. Months of violence on the streets have left more than 60 people dead, thousands more injured. Pitched battles with riot police have erupted throughout the country as many protesters demand President Nicolas Maduro step down. On Thursday, Maduro pledged to hold a referendum on a new constitution, a move that the opposition says is undemocratic and a blatant attempt to further entrench his power. Maduro, for his part, has called the opposition coup mongers backed by the United States. Well, my colleague Sandra Gatman spoke to one leading politician calling for Maduro's resignation.
Well, joining me now from Caracas is Maria Corina Machado. She's the leader of the opposition party, Vente Venezuela. Mrs. Machado, many thanks for joining us once again. You've been on this program before, and we spoke around the time the protests first began, more than 60 days ago, and yet we're still seeing thousands of people on the streets. Many have been killed, many hundreds have been injured, many thousands have been detained, and yet the calls for President Maduro to step down haven't cooled down. We've also heard President Maduro in the last several days promise to go ahead with this referendum to come up with a new constitution. Have your protests failed?
On the contrary, as you have said, every day that goes by, more and more Venezuelan people with the young students in the first line have come out because our fight is because of hunger in the streets and throughout our country. And not only hunger for food, but hunger for dignity, justice, and freedom. And certainly the results are huge. On first hand, we're seeing Maduro getting more and more isolated, not only in the international community, but locally. We have seen in the last days members of the Supreme Court that used to be absolutely loyal to the regime take a step aside and make distance with this initiative of the regime to go ahead with a change in the Constitution. And second, we've seen the general prosecutor said, and yesterday she went to the Supreme Court, once again stating that this process that Maduro wants to establish with strength and using the strength of the regime is unconstitutional as well. So what we're seeing is that not only more and more citizens are determined to move ahead into a transition process to recover liberty and democracy in Venezuela, but also Maduro getting more and more isolated by his own forces.
Yet from the outside looking inwards, it appears that President Maduro holds all the cards. He's got the loyalty of the National Guard, of the military. He has all the resources of the state oil company. He's got the loyalty of many Supreme Court judges as well, and a loyal supporter base. Do you honestly believe that President Maduro will, at some point, voluntarily give up power?
Well, he'll realize he has no option, and that's exactly what's starting to happen. Yes, they used to have a lot of money until they ruined not only Venezuelan private sector, but also Venezuelan oil company. They used to have a lot of international support because they distributed Venezuelan money to gain loyalties, and now everybody in the democratic world realizes that it's not a good idea to be linked to a regime that has clear relationships with narco-trafficking and money laundering and so on. And now they used to have control of the streets through repression and fear. And believe me, what I'm seeing in Venezuelan streets throughout our country is that fear has being left behind. You are seeing young students, you are seeing their mother, you are seeing workers, people that come from all walks of life getting together and making the regime realize they have only one option. And it's a negotiation, a definitive negotiation to move ahead into a transition to democracy. And certainly what used to be the regime's main support, which is the armed forces, is now starting to break apart as well. The repression, the brutal repression the regime is using against innocent, peaceful, unarmed people in the streets is starting to also create fractures within the armed forces that do not want to violate the Constitution and to be also blamed for international crimes against humanity.
We've heard these rumors months ago that the military is showing cracks in their loyalty to President Maduro, yet we're still waiting for that to happen. What proof do you have that there is an overall willingness to see the military turn on its heels and abandon their long-standing loyalty to Maduro, who over the years has promoted many generals and fed their troops?
Not only that, we also realize that international crimes such as the cartels have been infiltrating the armed forces, and there are certainly many high-rank officials and military that are linked to these international mafia, and that fear that with a regime change there will be justice and they will be blamed for that. But as days goes by, more and more soldiers and officials start denying and not accepting orders to attack innocent and peaceful demonstrators. There are more than 200 that are going through a judicial process because they have, as I mentioned, not accepted these orders, and there are hundreds that have asked the leave to go from the National Guard, which is a component that is being mainly used to repress citizens. But as I say, this is a process that is ongoing, and certainly the firm position of the national prosecutor, whom, as I said, used to be absolutely loyal to the process, and she has made a clear and definite decision to leave this process, has had a very important impact within the armed forces.
I want to get back to the protests, because you have been on the streets for the last several months leading these demonstrations against President Maduro. You insist, and others in the opposition insist, these are peaceful protests led by the people. They're non-violent. Yet we have seen violence. We've seen a man set on fire at an anti-government rally. We've most recently seen a judge who was responsible for the jailing of an opposition leader, Leopoldo López, shot and killed. Your defense minister has said that he suspects it was the job of a hitman hired by the opposition. What do you respond to that accusation?
Look, everybody in Venezuela knows that violence comes from the regime, and that that's precisely what they want, to turn a non-violent movement, a citizen movement, in incidents such as this in order to justify the use of repression and force against us. Everybody in Venezuela that stands in front of the regime, journalists, even the church, have been blamed for these events, which clearly only benefit the regime. They have the arms. They are using these arms against innocent students, women, all people in the streets, and certainly the strength of our movement is the fact that it's non-violent, it's a civic movement, and that's how it will stay and grow every day that goes by.
Okay, but can you categorically deny there are no violent elements fighting your fight?
Look, you've seen it in images and videos throughout the world. Ours is a non-violent movement. If the regime infiltrates or mass movement with certain individuals that want to provoke or want to give an image that is contrary to our values, everybody knows who is behind it. At this point, the movement in Venezuela, nobody can stop it. They will not detain it. And it's precisely to fight against violence, impunity, and corruption, which is the essence of the regime in place right now. And the world should know what's going on in Venezuela. Every day that goes by, one young student, one woman is shot down by these repressive forces. But every day that goes by, also at least 70 Venezuelans die because of hunger, because of the collapse of the health system, and because of violent groups that operate with impunity for years in our country. So we need to stop this murder and the massacre of citizens that's taking place, and that will only start to happen when the regime realizes that their best option is to step aside and facilitate a transition to democracy and peace.
One of your colleagues in the opposition, Lilian Tintori, was recently in the Oval Office standing next to President Trump. An opposition former president, Alvaro Uribe in Colombia, has endorsed you personally, both very divisive figures from the right side of politics. President Maduro accuses the opposition of being sponsored by the U.S. and its Western friends. Does it help or hinder your cause if you have these types of friends backing you?
Look, we need every single democratic voice around the world backing the people of Venezuela. This has nothing to do with a right or left discussion. This has to do with human rights. This has to do with a society that is more united than ever to fight for its right to live with dignity, justice, peace, and freedom. And at this point, every single recognized human rights NGO, the European Parliament, and governments around the world, the OAS, has come out and speak out about the tragedy, the humanitarian crisis that's developing in Venezuela, and that could end in a catastrophe very soon if this is not stopped now. So every single voice that defends the right to our people to live in peace and freedom and democracy is needed and welcome at this point.
Mrs. Machado, we're going to have to leave it there. It was a pleasure speaking to you. Wish we had more time to speak, but many thanks for joining us.